Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jackson Franklin for Congress event. Hi, Jackson. Nice to meet you.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. Thank you to Progressive Victory and to all the content creators. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess we should start off with the elephant in the room. I mean, how can we expect you to govern if you can't figure out your phone?
That's fair point. Fair point. Yeah.
I don't think we're in a position to impugn him for any technical difficulties at the moment. Maybe at a different time, at a different place. Jackson, I think you're fine.
Thank you, Vaush. I knew you'd have my back on this. Don't listen to the haters.
I can't.
Jackson,
dream right now.
I guess tell us about yourself. I mean, tell us about your platform, your race, and I think the most interesting part is you're incredibly young and like one of the younger people running for Congress in the country, and there's so many people in my audience, and I bet everyone else's audience thinking, how do I get involved? How do I help? They're always asking this, and it looks like you're taking like the most direct action. So yeah, tell us a little about it.
Yeah, so I'm Jackson Franklin. I'm running for Congress here in Indiana's 5th Congressional District. The current incumbent is Republican Victoria Spartz, who famously said last year at a town hall, criminals do not deserve due process. Very unconstitutional. I'm an Army combat medic. I deployed overseas to Kosovo a few years ago. I'm also a paramedic on the ambulance. I know all too well that rising healthcare costs are killing working class people all across this nation. I've been feeling the burn for the last 11 years now, since I was about 15 years old when I saw Bernie Sanders, and he won the state of Indiana and all 6 counties of the 5th district that I'm running in. And I'm very passionate about Medicare for all, get money out of politics and the genocide in Gaza, and fighting unapologetically for the working class, not the Epstein class. So we're bringing that fight to Indiana. May 5th is the primary. I'm telling everyone, get out and vote. And it's Cinco de Mayo, so we're all getting Mexican afterwards, of course. And we're very optimistic about our chances of winning here. We've been campaigning for a year and a half at this point, which is pretty unusual, like to the primary. And I've just gone all over the state, very proud that we've dragged the whole party and the whole state to the left or to the center, however you view it, on many issues. So right now in the state of Indiana, we've had Republican supermajority for more than 20 years at this point. And Indiana ranks 50th at a voter turnout last midterm. 60% of registered voters in 2022 didn't even vote. And I blame the party and the candidates, because all too often people feel, well, they know the Republicans are going to stab them right in the face, but also that the Democratic Party has been stabbing them in the back. And that's because we have 2 right-wing corporate parties that don't listen to the interests of us working people, but only at the interests of these large corporate lobbyists and elite special interest groups. So we're trying to give a voice to working class people. And if you want to get involved, please go to jacksonfranklinforcongress.com or sign up for Progressive Victory, of course, because we're doing phone banking. We have 10 days until the election. It's us, the grassroots campaign, versus basically the establishment campaign. I'm proud to say that I can recognize when genocide is happening. Not everybody can say that. I'm proud to say that I believe that healthcare is a human right. Not everyone can say that in this race. So that's kind of like the stakes that are on here, and the whole nation, the whole world's eyes are on this race right now, because there are 9 congressional districts in the state of Indiana, and the 5th district is the swing district of the state. So if we can win here in this district, we can take back the House of Representatives, we can impeach Donald Trump and the rest of his war criminal administration, and stop the bleeding that this regime has been causing to working class people all across this nation. So I'm very optimistic for this movement, and I'm glad to have you guys on the team supporting us.
Yeah, could I jump in really quick before we get to the nitty gritty politically? They're a good Mexican in Indiana 5.
Yeah, there's a few good places. Casa del Sol and Muncie, that's where I'm from. Ball State, if anybody knows. That's one of my favorite places. So
just making sure. I grew up in LA, so I just wanted to make sure that you weren't, suffering out there. I don't know. I've got to be honest. I don't know much about Indiana in general. Usually when I talk politics or when I engage with the primary races, Indiana isn't talked about much in Dem circles. It's not really considered like a high contender state in terms of Dem investment. But you know, like you said, Indiana fives, it's not exactly off the map. You know, there is a real potential for contention there. Why do you think the Democrats historically have not directed much attention to Indiana? You know, why is it so under-discussed in Dem circles?
Well, I think that the Democratic establishment kind of just like writes us off. Like Obama, we got to remind ourselves, Obama won this state pretty handedly in 2008. And the last real presidential primary that we've had in Indiana was 2016. And as I mentioned, Bernie Sanders won here, which the fact that I can say the last real presidential primary was 10 years ago is absurd to me, because it was over in 2020 by the time it got to us. We're one of the later ones. And then 2024, abysmal. So yeah, people just feel like, oh, all we got to do is raise money and just sell out to these large corporations. And that's kind of historically what the Indiana Democratic Party has been guilty of. You know, people fight harder and they show up when you fight for something and not just against something. So when both candidates are selling you out to big health insurance, you know, it's kind of hard to get young people out and non-traditional voters out to vote. Indiana is surrounded by states that have legalized cannabis in one form or another. So and according to a Ball State study, 87% of Hoosiers want to legalize cannabis. So why do we not have it legalized? I wonder if it has anything to do with Eli Lilly being headquartered in Indianapolis and lobbying both sides of the aisle. So a lot of people just feel like their vote doesn't count, like, oh, it doesn't matter. But it does matter. You can change the dialogue in this state, as this campaign and many other adjacent campaigns in the state have proven, and we're fighting back for working class people. And I'm optimistic, like we can win in Indiana with a populist agenda. This is a Rust Belt state. We need working class candidates to stand up for the working class. And that's how we're going to win in Indiana and places across the country. And it's the blueprint to victory.
Actually, I had a question I saw on your policy platform. There's this American Anti-Corruption Act, which will make corruption illegal. And to me, this sounds on its face, surface level, a lot like bills that might be passed, like it's the all good things bill. And I wondered if you could elaborate in such a way that is more in depth of how do you make corruption illegal, or why isn't it already illegal? Yeah,
so definitely one of the top issues here is, of course, Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision in 2010 that equated money to a campaign as freedom of speech. And as we all know on this stream here, if money equals freedom of speech, then whoever's the wealthiest has the loudest voice in our so-called democracy. And that's not democracy. That's, as Bernie Sanders says, that's oligarchy, right? So overturning Citizens United, banning lobbying, it would go a long way, and just having public funding of our elections. You know, I believe that it should be like a voucher program or some kind. Like you pay taxes and you get, let's just say $200 to start, right? And you could give, 50 to your favorite presidential candidate in the primary, and then 25 to your Senate, 25 to your rep, and however you want to divide it up, right? And then again in the general. So these are some of the things, along with, you know, of course, I support like ranked choice voting and all that to really get deep in the weeds about election reform, automatic voter registration. But these are some of the huge steps that we can take to make sure that we have elections, not auctions, you know, just campaigns that sell us out to the highest bidder. So these are just some of the top provisions that are in the American Anti-Corruption Act.
I'd like to add to that, if I may, because people often talk about the corrosive effects of money in politics, right? You know, a billionaire donates this much. But one of the other benefits of public funding is that because there's a more direct relationship between the public support and the money that the candidate gets, because you can like pledge an amount per, you know, support, like a vote kind of contributes to their ability to fundraise as well. You avoid the opposite end of that problem, which is that areas where there's a low chance of a given party winning become just voids. There is not a lot of money for Democrats in Indiana 5, so it takes comparatively little from the Republican side to to blow them out. Democrats don't want to invest nationally because there's more competitive, I mean, in Indiana, right, you can go more competitive just going a little bit northwest of there, right? There are other Midwestern states that are more in play. But on the other hand as well, Republicans don't need to invest that much because they're not running against much money. They're running against a small pool. So everyone feels disconnected. It's like how the Electoral College, kind of defers the results of the presidential to 10 swing states, and the rest of the country is just a given. No one's fighting for California. No one's fighting for West Virginia.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you look at
you were telling me. Okay.
Okay.
I was going to say, Dylan, you were telling me earlier how much you hated Indiana. Did you want to jump in here?
I won't even say the state's name, so I will not.
Throwing shade at Indiana, the crossroads of America. Dylan, really, you have a problem with the?
It's a non-Maryland state. It's just you and 49 other states have a problem, and that's as simple as that. Honestly, you were going to say something. I wanted to ask you something, but you were going to respond to what Vaush said.
Oh yeah, I mentioned I was going to talk about Victoria Spartz has taken $90,000 from AIPAC, which is like, me or you, we think maybe $90,000, but you look at some of these other congressional campaigns and AIPAC, even Democrats throwing like $1 million or $500,000 behind these races, and she is a Zionist, thick and true, and only $90,000 from AIPAC is interesting. It's because they don't need to spend all that much to defeat a weak corporate Democrat. And time and time again, that's what has happened in this district and in this state, because you have Democrats who just don't really, last election, our nominee won the primary and then vanished, didn't even show up. And we were about 12, 13 points under. And that's what, hey, if anything, we got 39% of the vote with a candidate that just did not show up. We got to win 11 points back with a actual working class champion. So, I mean, read it however you may, but it's Vaush's point of they spend very little and get huge gains because no one's trying to actually compete here. And we're just working harder. Hence why we're running this campaign for a year and a half, going across the state, gathering up all the support. And that's how you're going to win the ground game. It's actually having an appealing message for working people to rally behind.
Dylan, before you ask your question, you've muted yourself on the VOD Ninja. You got to undo that.
Oh, am I muted on the Ninja app? Oh my goodness.
It's over.
Sorry, it was very it's a very complicated system we have here. It's very very elaborate, very professional. So I wanted to ask, I liked your campaign for a few reasons, but one thing I had to give you credit for, and we've talked about this, in a call before when we were discussing your grading with Track Ukraine, is that your platform is one of the most progressive when it comes to supporting Ukraine and the most detailed. Your opponent doesn't have anything on their website to talk about Ukraine whatsoever. There's nothing really talking about foreign policy to begin with, but nothing about the largest and most violent war ongoing on the planet. I couldn't find really any history of public statements. And I think that it does behoove people when they're going from the state level to the national level to show that they can be on the national level. They can have these discussions and they can have them publicly, transparently, and they can show a positive message. I believe a big part of the reason we lost in 2024 is because we weren't able to show a bold enough positive message. Tax deductions on a house, XYZ might sound nice to the very narrow group that will actually be affected by that policy. But when you're talking about appealing to the vast majority of working people, there was not that bold mission. And there might not have always been exactly clarity when it came to what Harris stands for. You make it very clear not only what you stand for on working class issues, but on Ukraine. You directly call out ethnic cleansing. You directly call for military support to Ukraine. You directly call out the war crimes, the kidnapping of children. You have more bullet points on Ukraine going into detail than what Track Ukraine advises campaigns to have on their website. So you actually you went beyond what we would usually advise a campaign to do. And then when we had the private discussion, you were 100% on board with pressuring the party to get a bill passed if we take back the House, especially if we take back the Senate, that because you're not bought out, because you're coming in based on your values and you're 100% genuine, you can confront Hakeem Jeffries and say, I want this to be a priority because Ukraine's on fire and we need to deal with the crisis. And I just want to say that it was one of the most progressive platforms I've seen on Ukraine. How did you get there? How did you get to a position where you understand that, sovereignty and self-determination is the grounding of what should be the grounding of the less moral philosophy in America?
So, yeah, I mean, I was deployed overseas, and we mentioned this in our call a few days ago, and I was actually watching your channel. I was deployed in Kosovo, and there were Ukrainian soldiers there, and I was already very passionate about Ukraine. But yeah, just the right to self-determination, the right to sovereignty. I mean, it's pretty easy, in my opinion, to see the big bad, reactionary state, authoritarian state come in to a smaller country and just try to, they're ethnically cleansing. And if we can't have leaders in the Democratic Party to call that out and stand with Ukraine, stand with the oppressed people of anywhere in the world, then they are not leaders. They're just there. They're puppets. So we need to make sure we untie Ukraine's hands, listen to them on the ground to see what they need and how we can help. But, I've taught CLS classes, combat lifesaver for non-military members, like 2 Ukrainians and 2 NATO allies while I was overseas. I'm very proud of that fact. And, and then they went off. They were bussed off back to Ukraine. And, Slava Ukraini, 100%. So I was just always there kind of naturally, since the start of the conflict. And, actually, since Crimea, to be honest, since 2014, I mean, I was young, I know, but I'm a huge history wonk, huge political nerd, I'd say. So I've had my eye on it since the conflict truly started. So, yeah, I just always was receptive and sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause this entire time.
I just want to say that you haven't showed any reservation in your belief, either in how much detail you give on your platform or when you talk about it or when you talked about it to me. You're bold about it. And that's something I prefer on the progressive side of the aisle, because a lot of times when I'm reading progressive policy platforms on Ukraine, they'll meet a certain standard to get a green ranking when it comes to our ranking system. But it's yes, we support Ukraine with defensive aids that will be overlooked by a million different monitors, and we must be careful on X, Y, and Z. And there's more detail about the asterisks than there is for actually supporting Ukraine. And I feel that this comes from uncentering Ukrainians from the conversation, forgetting exactly how this war started in the first place, and forgetting what would be necessary to end it, not just trying to limit one's rhetoric to sound more palatable to those who haven't been introduced to the Russian invasion yet or the relationship. But you have never had that problem, and that's why I'm happy to say you have the best platform of any progressive on Ukraine currently running for office that's clearly displayed. And I want to give you immense credit for that. And that's also why Track Ukraine will be releasing its first endorsement of the cycle, and it will be of your campaign.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Dylan, be honest though. Did you know the answer when you asked that? Wow, you seem to have all the correct opinions. Where did you learn all the correct opinions, sir? You must have known. I didn't.
I remember getting thrown Jackson Franklin's account from one of the people at PV. They're like, hey, this is somebody we're thinking about doing an event with, but we don't know if we're going to end up doing an event with. What do you think about talking to them? And I looked at the platform and I said, this is the exact type of voice we need in progressive circles. So, I mean, he has my complete endorsement.
It's crazy to me that there's not more uniformity on the issue, too, not only because, obviously supporting Ukraine's the morally correct thing to do, but also because there's kind of a void in messaging in Democratic circles. Republicans are a lot more aggressive, I think, in their counter messaging on how, I don't know, we're getting shafted by NATO or this is somehow Ukraine's fault. They push the conspiracy line a lot more effectively than Democrats do the opposite. I feel like that's the issue in places like Indiana, especially. I grew up in California, in LA, and now I live in Washington. Both times, pretty blue areas, about as blue as it gets, really, outside of DC. And I am, for that reason, I'm suffused with progressive messaging. I go outside, they got LGBT flags in the barbershop windows. It's everywhere. You can't escape it. But I think, and I'm just guessing here, Jackson, you tell me if I'm right or wrong, I feel like if you live in Indiana 5, or probably Indiana in general, your exposure to progressive or democratic messaging, it's a little bit more reserved, a little bit more selective. It's not as overwhelming. And as a consequence, I feel like sometimes you don't feel the presence of the Democratic Party or its messaging at all. Republican messaging is inescapable. It doesn't matter where in America you live, you are hearing what Trump is doing. It doesn't, even when he wasn't president, even when Biden was president, you're always hearing about him. But I think that there's a real gap in messaging there, a place where in the absence of strong Democratic messaging, Republicans can attribute to Democrats any position and people will just roll with it. You talk about low voter turnout. Do you feel like the Democrats, it's not just a messaging or it's not just a positions issue. Like if the Democrats just were a little louder here, they might be able to get better returns?
Yeah, they have to fight to earn the votes. So, yeah, a lot of these, I might say, establishment candidates, they just feel like they're owed support from some certain areas, pockets of Indiana. And that's the complete opposite of the truth. You got to earn, but the biggest voting demographic is non-voters. And, you mentioned Republicans' narratives on Ukraine. Victoria Spartz, the Republican I'll eventually be running against, she is the only Ukrainian-born member of Congress, but yet she says that Trump is the only president or only person on the planet that can negotiate a fair peace between Ukraine and Russia. And this is right after, I believe, Donald Trump inviting President Zelensky into the Oval Office and just like berating him. You're like, oh yeah, that's the person I want to negotiate a fair peace with, and also take half of Ukraine's natural resources. So I think if Democrats actually stood, not just on this issue, but all the big issues, ICE, healthcare, women's rights, in Indiana specifically, like we can drive down the street and see 20 Republican signs before you see some kind of Democratic message. And I think you just have to stand up and fight and be bold. But
it does sometimes feel like the Democrats think that being right is enough. Like, you know what I mean? Like you said, they feel entitled to a vote. Like the Democrats, they kind of fold their arms and they're like, well, I'm right on this issue. Like there's not really an argument to be made here. Because the Republican positions are often just like anti-civilizational, right? Like, sometimes the Republicans, they'll just break stuff. They just cut hundreds of millions in funding from the Forest Service. Why? I don't know. It's fun. It's fun to lose our trees. I don't know. There's no argument for it. But the Democrats, they think, well, since that's obviously bad, the counter position that you don't do that is self-evident. When in reality, you have to advocate for the good thing as hard as the other side advocates for the bad thing. Being right is worth on its own almost nothing in politics. It's all about the argument that you make for it. And maybe being right gives you a more solid argument. But if you're not even making one, I don't know. I've driven around America a lot. I live in the deep blue places, but I drive around. I do the road trips. And sometimes I wonder, these people, these Republicans, I pass by farms with Trump signs. Do they even know what Democrats believe? Like, have they even been given a chance to understand or to make a choice? You know what I mean? It makes me wonder sometimes, like what kind of void. I think everybody knows what Trump is saying and what he wants because he's so loud and because it keeps getting repeated day in, day out, every media cycle, every news station. I don't know if that's the same both ways.
I completely agree with that. Yeah, 100%. Like you knock on doors around the community, all across the district, and I might say all across the state, and people still like, the lower education, lower educated voter, they think that some people think that the Democratic Party is a socialist organization ran by Antifa, and they're still trying to, Obama is going to take your guns one of these days. And, the COVID vaccine is just waiting to sprout out of our chest like the alien. But we have to come in with a counter narrative and fight for what's right. If the Republicans own the dialogue over trans people, we can't have, a governor of a Democratic state of the West Coast, I might say, go in and talk to Charlie Kirk and be like, you may have a point on that. No, you stand 10 toes down and you stand up for trans rights, do what's right for the sake of what's right. And a lot of people are not hearing that counter message.
Well, on that note specifically, I guess I want to ask, I don't know if you saw, there's a lot of dialogue. Ezra Klein was talking about, what if we run more center Democratic people in not so safe districts because, running a progressive there isn't so viable against a Republican, like they'll get blown out of the water. talk about your primary opponents. What sets you apart from them, and is your giving the Democratic platform more positive messaging and like, hey, these are the things we're genuinely fighting for, instead of just we're right and we're stopping the Republicans? What's going to set you apart from them?
What sets me apart from my political, there's 7 people in this race, but a realistic perspective is really that it's between us and the establishment campaign, the corporate establishment campaign. So what sets me apart is that we are a grassroots campaign. We are unapologetically fighting for the working class, not the donor class. I am fighting for Medicare. Like, all these issues are incredibly popular. According to the polls, the Hill, Medicare for all polls at 70%. So that's Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, all in one poll. We want Medicare for all. But there's a huge disconnect between what the working class people all around you want and then our politicians on Wall Street. And it comes back down to money in politics. So all too often, Democratic politicians sanitize their message to be corporate safe for donors. They want to sell themselves. It's that tightrope. And I'm not envious of that tightrope. I don't know how they even sleep at night, trying to balance like, oh, be popular enough to earn some votes, but also don't be too wild to, scare away the corporate donors. So, they can't say healthcare is a human right. They can't say Medicare for all. They want like a private corporate solution. So what this campaign brings forward is just a bold vision for the future, a future that you can believe in. And right now we have a system that prioritizes profits over people. And this campaign is proudly saying people over profits. And we just, they want us nose to nose against each other. That way we're not looking up. They don't want us standing shoulder to shoulder. Most of our issues on the ground, like even most Republicans can agree with my platform. There's a large pipeline, like a Trump voter to like a Mamdani voter, believe it or not, or an AOC, like a cross vote, someone who voted for Donald Trump and AOC. They want populism. They know that the elites, whoever they may be in their mind, are screwing them over. No one thinks that the political system is working for them. What this campaign is offering that the others are not is a system that is fighting for the little guy, that is fighting for working class people. We want a system that represents all people and not just the top 1%. So that's what sets us apart.
I will say, like, and I'm operating with a bias here, of course, because I'm quite left-leaning, but I've never really, I don't have a mental profile of a Midwestern non-voter or an independent or a centrist or whatever else who actively wants a moderate Democrat to represent them. I can imagine someone who doesn't like Republicans, but also doesn't like the idea of a radical far leftist like AOC or whatever they perceive AOC to represent. But I don't think anyone's making a positive case for somebody like, I don't know, Slotkin, for example. It seems like they're just the candidate that fills the void, not really appealing to anyone, but designed to repel as few people as possible, which is, I mean, it's a way to do politics. I don't know. It doesn't seem to mobilize many people. It seems to lead to a lot of apathy, in my opinion, in the long run. I want to ask, by the way, in a practical question, because politically, obviously, we agree with a lot of what you believe. It's a pretty wide field right now for Democratic candidates in Indiana 5. My understanding is that without a lot of direction from the national Democrats, or the state Democrats for that, for that part, oftentimes Indiana 5, the vote gets split like pretty wide. There's not a lot of clear messaging or cohesion on who the leader is in the primaries, and it just sort of, it falls apart against the Republican incumbent. Do you have any plans for dealing with that wide open field right now?
So, yeah, the fact that there are 7 candidates in this race, I'm actually in talks with 2 of the other campaigns, and maybe I won't name drop them right now because we're still, but we looked at what happened in Chicago's Kat Abou-Ghazaleh's district. I forget if it was the 9th district, perhaps. But overall, the progressives won that district, if you tally up all the votes. But then Kat lost, the leading progressive candidate. So I'm in talks with 2 of the other campaigns right now, see if they're interested in dropping out and endorsing me. And we're getting some traction there, kind of floating it around. But I believe even if they don't, we still send a very yet there's no polling, of course, great Indiana. But I'm still very confident that we're going to win. Yeah, the swing state, or the swing district in this state and there's not like massive like Axios or Reuters polling is kind of insane to me. It's expensive. It's like $20,000 if you really want accurate results. But I'm still,
if that's the case, how are you, I gotta ask, how are you leveraging like who should drop out? Like, you know, is there some indication that one of you is more ahead than the other, or is it just kind of like, guys, look, I'm better, all right, come on?
No, well, it's
arm wrestling.
You know, it's like win numbers. It's like campaign infrastructure. You know, like one of them doesn't have a team, joined in late. Same thing with the other guy. He's, you know, only really just paying a small few amount of people for his staff. Whereas we have team members in all 6 counties, and we're like, hey man, we've already hit the win numbers in a couple of these counties. You guys have knocked like -3 doors. So maybe we got some traction going on, and like we can gauge, like vibe check it as well. Like they can go into a room and see, you know, a crowd full of our supporters, like wearing shirts, holding signs, and they'd be like, all right, yeah, like maybe not as ahead as they would like. And just compelling them like, hey, you know, like there's no point in getting 6th or 7th place, man. Like if you drop out and support us, then the pro-genocide candidate won't effing win. And like we can actually, you know, even if they do win, and which I don't think that they will win in the general, even if they make it out of the primary, because, you know, hey, we got an APAC candidate and an APAC light candidate. Good luck. Go out and vote in the least, you know, the 50th voter turnout state in the whole country. I don't think that's going to work. But just trying to compel the message to them that, you know, the children in Gaza can't tell who voted for the bombs that are falling on. They don't care whether the bombs are red or blue. They just want them to stop. So everything is on the line in this election. So that's kind of what we're talking about. You know, they know where they kind of are even without polling, you know, just organically.
Right. And like even in 2022, when Spartz won, I mean, I think Pickett is still running in your primary, right? And Pickett lost by 18. Some of these other people, like it's already proven that they wouldn't win. I mean, maybe they have a different kind of approach this time. But yeah, I can see what you're saying, where it's like, look, you might not do it nearly as well as the general. So don't you want there to be a better support for what you think will rally more voters to your side?
How much you need national investment too. Like it's so important to have somebody, some kind of organization there to point out and go like, hey, listen, okay, we're locking in on this one. Okay, we're not going to it's not going to be a split field with 12 people fighting over scraps. Like we need to consolidate. You know, it's really tough. I really do fault the Dems. The Dems have been so bad about investing in red and purple states, you know, and I think that those consequences are most acutely felt here when you have a real shot. You just need a little bit of like top-down organization to lock it in.
For sure. Yeah, I've actually been told by basically, because and I'll just say it, like the race is really between our campaign and the JD Ford's campaign. And I've had basically all other campaigns except for one. So there's like 4 others say that like, yeah, there's no chance I'm going to win. And at that point, like, and of our platforms are like 90% in line, and then they really disagree with the JD Ford campaign not running on issues. All right, at that point, I think the cause is larger than any one individual. You know, take down your pride for a second and just support the cause, you know? So that's my personal opinion on that.
We allowed to ask a hard question? I have semi-interesting. So I see you're fighting for $25 an hour minimum wage, and my understanding is whenever I hear a national minimum wage that high, when I look at parts of the country where it's $7 or $8 right now, which is not high enough to be clear, but the amount of chaotic disruption that would happen if that jumped to 25 for all the different businesses in these, you know, much more lower cost of living states. How does that get implemented in a way that does not just destroy the economy of places that literally can't afford to quadruple their minimum wage or triple it?
Definitely having a transition program in some of these areas, you know, like California may be ready. They're already there, you know, in some areas. And whereas Indiana perhaps may not, or like Wyoming or Idaho, like some of these other areas. And I would be receptive to a by area minimum wage, like, hey, base it off like standard of like quality of, you know, life, or like, you know, rising costs, whatever the area is. I'm receptive to that message. Like truly I am. The fight for 15 was 10 years ago. So just for that same buying power, from 10 years ago, now it's 25. And in fact, if wages kept up with productivity since the 50s, the minimum wage would be like upwards of like $40 right now, and like nationwide. So what we're fighting for is just like living wages, more than just living wages, dignified wages. You shouldn't just be struggling to get by, like having a hard time to keep the lights on and food on the table. You should have enough to live. So I'm receptive to different plans. I'm definitely just fighting for those dignified wages and making sure that people have what they've already worked for. They've earned that money, and it's all getting sucked up to the parasitic billionaire class. So we were just fighting for a voice for working class people. Whatever that ends up looking like, I would say, like, I think the 25 number is the national average of what the Fight for 15 was. So we can base it off region if we can. Whatever we can do to raise the freaking wage is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I remember, I think you were telling me you were inspired by the art of the deal and negotiating, and how you have to like overshoot a little bit to come down to the place where you want to, really be at the end. So that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does often feel like, I guess the Republicans are so good at consolidating their positions. They all kind of, it's like scattershot. They all kind of, broadly signal in a direction, and then eventually they kind of center in on the mean of what they think they can get away with. But with Democrats, the messaging sometimes is so scattered, like you can't even agree on the general direction. Like we basically abandoned, like Medicare for all, for example, that was a big talking point back in 2016, a little bit of one back in 2020. Nowadays, we don't talk about it at all because it feels like a distant dream. I mean, with how bad things have gotten, it feels like a utopian to even hope for, right? But public polling hasn't changed much, right? People are still keen on the idea. No one's happy with their insurance company. So yeah, I don't know. It's important to be aspirational too. Though I agree, like any like rollout for 25 would have to be so tiered or so. Yeah, it's so easy to break things. It's so tough to fix things, like Trump can just wave his hand and I'd like break the Department of Education. That just happens. But when it comes to fixing problems, you have to build it up so carefully. I'm just rambling. Sorry.
We also have to make sure that we tie it to inflation. That way we don't have this fight, 6 years after we get whatever policy we get, whatever the wage is set to, we have to make sure that wages are automatically going up. And it's not just like, hey, we have to fight every so often and people are struggling to live again.
I wanted to ask you about
housing market. Oh. No. You haven't talked in a while, Dylan, please.
I wanted to ask you about veterans issues. So a lot of veterans come home, even those who have not seen direct combat service, with different forms of trauma. PTSD obviously being the most well-known example of this. But a lot of it is the transition from that type of structured life, often in high-stress environments, sometimes combat environments, depending on the veteran, back to everyday living and trying to go from that type of existence to what sometimes can feel like a mundane or existence, or walking through a slog, or it's very difficult to explain going through that transition unless you've gone through it. And homelessness amongst veterans is obviously a major issue. Depression amongst veterans is obviously a major issue. And suicide obviously has been one of the major issues confronting veterans for the entirety of mine in your lifetime. And so I wanted to know, what is the progressive message to these veterans? What kind of deal can they be offered when veterans benefits are currently being targeted by an administration that claims to stand with veterans?
So we need to take care of those that take care of us. Most people in the Army or military more broadly, they're just average people. Like there's a high school to prison pipeline. And sometimes the only way out of that pipeline for a lot of marginalized communities is, I'm going to join the military. They want college. I sure did. I'm still in the National Guard, the Army. And, I definitely went through a hard transition, after being gone, seeing, the results of genocide overseas, and then coming back and having that weird reverse culture shock. And it lasted quite some time. It was not like, a couple months. No, it was like a year of like adjusting the entire time. So as far as what progressives can offer the veteran community, the military community, I'm fighting for your right to come home and have a system that is taking care of you. I think that mental health care is a human right. You should be able to be taken care of and get seen by the people that sent you overseas in the first place. I'm fighting for TRICARE for all who serve, making sure that, so TRICARE is like the military healthcare. And I don't care how long you've served, if you've served the nation, and before we get Medicare for all, that is, you should be able to go get seen. If you're sick, if you got blown up overseas, you should be able to get seen by a doctor and be taken care of. You know, Victoria Spartz greatly in 2022 voted against the PACT Act, which was all it was, and thank goodness it passed anyway. It was giving veterans the health care they needed after being exposed to Agent Orange and toxic burn pits overseas. She voted against it twice. She also voted for the One Big Beautiful Bill, so-called, which gutted more than 83,000 jobs from the VA. So, you know, if you didn't think she hated vets enough, she doesn't care about the Ukrainian soldiers overseas, and she doesn't care about the soldiers that come back home either. So making sure that we expand the VA, you know, these yellow ribbon programs, you know, the military to civilian transitionary jobs programs, like those jobs were therapists, they were psychiatrists, people to make sure you get back up on your feet and, you know, are welcomed home and like have a comfortable way of life. I also want to expand the GI Bill, GI Bill home loan. And on top of that, you shouldn't have to join the Army for college. Education is a human right as well. So taking care of these benefits of, like, you know, why people join the military in the first place, some of these are just a given, of course, but making sure that you can afford a house. And also, no more houseless vets. Call me a radical, right? But I think if you serve no one deserves to be houseless. It's literally, more moral to just house them, but it's also cheaper to house every unhoused person. There are more vacant places of shelter than there are houseless people. And disproportionately, it is veterans. So we need to take care of those who took care of us and have a system that represents the people who are fighting and dying for this nation. Instead of Congress,
it does feel like a breakdown of the social pact at a very basic level. So obviously, like, everyone's struggling to afford rent right now, insurance, you know, through the roof, college education more and more expensive. But you'd think, like, normally the logic would be, okay, you get these things at the very least. You get these things if you serve, if you're a veteran. But that's not really true. Obviously, the college education, you know, you get that through. But the VA is terrible. I mean, it's gutted. And I think you have to take that as, I don't know, to use a term I often misuse, a watermark, I guess, for our overall standards for taking care of the citizenry. If we can't even do this for veterans, man, how the hell are we going to do it for anyone else? If we can't even figure out the VA, this is like the most basic 101. Countries far poorer than the United States at least figure this out. The veterans at least get health care. But over here, not only do we not really get that, the president's like openly contemptuous of veterans, like he thinks they're suckers, you know? So to me, it speaks of a broader, like, if you believe you can get ahead by following the rules and working within the system, you're a sap. You know, it seems like a system designed to, like, almost manufacture cynicism, where not even the expected path of being able to secure a simple, you know, basic standard of living, not even that one works.
Maybe another contentious question, Jackson, but if you kind of frame this as like, this is the establishment versus us, like working for the people. If you win this primary, do you expect Ford to endorse you, and vice versa? If you lose, are you going to endorse Ford, or do you think there's like a lot of animosity there? What do you see as the path going forward, coalescing these two, not diametrically opposed? I mean, you're both Democrats, but clearly at odds in certain degrees, messaging-wise, parties.
Yeah, we had like a forum or debate, whatever you want to call it, a little while ago, and he said 100%, like, whoever wins, he'll support, though he doesn't, it's not ideological for him as much. For me, like I said, hey, you know, I'll crawl over broken glass to vote against Victoria Spartz, but it doesn't mean that, like, I agree with their policies. Just how much do I give my support? Like, I might just stay quiet. You know, I'm like, hey, you know, like, I'll support you generally. I'll go against Spartz, but, you know, if your going to bomb children in Gaza and the West Bank and South Lebanon and Iran, then I'm not going to go say like and lie to the people and say, oh yeah, you're a great guy, you know, like even though you support genocide and ethnic cleansing. So it's kind of a mixed bag. If once I win, yeah, he's going to endorse and, you know, support. But like, yet again, I'm on a issues based campaign. So like, hey, the people, like we just ran a year and a half, ran a, you know, hell of a campaign fighting like sweat, blood, and tears for this cause. If we come up short during this election, the people deserve concessions on policy. Like we shouldn't have to be like, you know, plucking teeth out, asking not to bomb babies overseas. You know, that should just be a given. So if they want my support, my full support, and not just like, oh yeah, generally better than the Republican, low bar, that kind of talk, then come to where the people are. I mean, it's morally right. And of course, like you're not going to be able to win. Learn the lessons from 2024 and go to where the people are on these issues, such as Medicare for all, not supporting genocide, you know, raising the wage, all these popular issues. Come to us and then we will fight for you. You know, you got to stand up for us first.
Do you think, are those the primary issues that you hear when you talk to voters in Indiana 5? I mean, like, because I know there are going to be a lot of disaffected people who are upset with the Democratic Party's obstinance and centrism and unwillingness to move with the times and so on. But I've never been to Indiana, so I have to take your word for it. You know, the average person who withholds their vote from the Democrats, you know, what do you think they're waiting on?
So I've gone all across the district, of course. I've done more town halls than every other candidate combined. And I've talked to thousands of people over the last year and a half, maybe 10,000 people more. And it's basically like what's in the news is what they're talking about. Like ICE is one of the topics. I'll tell right now, Indiana, like there's a new ICE headquarters in the district, in our district in Carmel, Indiana, which is just north of Indianapolis. People are really concerned about that, you know, and we've had rumors of ICE being around, operating in the area. We're trying to stand up and fight back on that. So as well as data centers is probably one of the bigger issues I hear about everywhere, no matter where they are from in the district. People are worried about utility costs rising. They're worried about the data, you know, their online data getting sold to, you know, multi-million-dollar corporations without their consent, destroying the environment and so forth. And many other issues like wages, like housing costs, like renting is way too expensive. Gas cost, of course, just everywhere going up. So a lot of these, you know, kitchen table issues are getting brought up all across the district, and I'm hearing it every single time. But as far as, like you mentioned, like genocide, healthcare is one of the biggest issues anywhere you go in the country, hands down. But I must say that, like, even like a lot of people are trying, like if you look at any numbers coming out anywhere, most of the Democratic base, I believe it's upwards of 90%, says what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. And even not like independents, like I saw a poll, CNN come out, and like of the vast majority of independents want a party to stand up against the horrendous acts that are ongoing overseas. But if you don't have a candidate or a party that gives a voice to working class people, I feel like, you know, and we don't, like, the data repeats itself. It's going to be another repeat of 2024. People are going to stay home, and you got to give them an alternative vision to fight for. You got to listen to them. So all these top issues all combined is just trying to give a voice to working class people. You got to meet them on the policy. So in like the other campaign, they're not really running on any policy. They're just running on like money and name recognition. So that's what we have over them, and why I'm hopeful for our victory.
I do want to ask a non-policy related question. I could ask you policy questions all day. I like talking to you, but I do want to ask you specifically about communicating with people who are not traditionally Democratic voters. Because if you win the Democratic primary, a general against Victoria Spartz isn't going to be easy. I mean, she is not a one-time, she's won multiple times now. She's an established name. She even has national name recognition. It wouldn't be impossible if the White House or the Republican Party saw that she was going to lose, that they might actually funnel some more resources into the district, into the 5th district. So there's, a fight ahead. How are you going to communicate a progressive message to people who would never describe themselves as progressive? And when they think progressive, they think like, oh, it's the policies of like RuPaul's Drag Race.
Right. So
wait, it's not
populism. It's as I talked about earlier, people know that the system's not working for them and that they want change, but our leaders are not stepping up to the plate. They don't have the spine to do what it takes to stand up to leadership, to stand up to people in their own party. And this regime has cut off their Medicaid, their health, their health care, their food stamps. We're using taxpayer money instead of investing over here at home, it's getting sent overseas to make your gas prices go up, and we're killing children along the way. So that message that most of our issues are not left versus right, but top versus down. It's the working class people next to you versus the billionaires that are cutting down your unions, sending your jobs overseas, and bribing your politicians. It's us versus them. Donald Trump will go on a huge spree talking about whatever the scapegoat of the day is. But in my opinion, the only dangerous minority is the top 1%. And it's up to us to organize that grassroots coalition to fight back and question power. And it's as civil rights leader John Lewis once said, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And it's just up to us to fight back and organize that. And just giving a voice to working class people. I mean, Victoria Spartz has failed us time and time again. She said she wasn't going to vote for the One Big Beautiful Bill. Then she did. She got one phone call from Donald Trump, and then boom, she voted for it. She voted against the PACT Act. She voted, against Ukraine, her own home country. So there's all these issues. She says she's pro-life, but yet she supports genocide. She stands up to the quote unquote establishment in her view, but yet she buckles anytime they need her on a vote. So we need an actual leader, an actual fighter. I'm not going there to make friends with people that I don't have to. I'm not going to call Nancy Pelosi, Mama Bear and cuddle up to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Those people, I will work with them on policies that will help the people that I'm running to represent. I will unapologetically fight for the working class, not the donor class. And that's why people who wouldn't say that they are quite the most progressive people, I've convinced Republicans to vote for me even in the primary, seemingly, the most furthest left person in the race, because they want that populism. And that's how we can bring people to the table. And you look at the election previous, and as I mentioned, we have a very low turnout state. So we don't have to win back literal voting Republicans. We have to win back earn the trust of the people that have been left behind. And that's how we are going to win in the 5th district. That's how we're going to win across Indiana. And that's how we're going to win back this nation.
Hey, well, on that note, any last minute questions, guys? Otherwise, I'm going to do some shout outs.
I say hit it.
Yeah, shout out Track Ukraine from Dylan. If you guys want to go look at that, and I guess Jackson, you're the first endorsed candidate. That's awesome. If you guys love Jackson, there's phone banking with Progressive Victory. I think they said 5 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah,
5 p.m. Eastern time every day. So up until the primary, which is on the May 2nd. And then if you go to progress.win/member, you can become a member of Progressive Victory, help with phone banking, help find candidates like this, help promote just the kind of politics that you've been screaming about for the past decade and don't feel like are being seen. This is how we get it done. So Jackson, thank you so much. Great luck on the 2nd, and we hope the best for you.
Thank you very much. May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, Election Day. We need all the help that we can get. And, it's as we talked about, this is all eyes of the world are upon us right now. So we need your help. We can take back this seat. We can take back the House of Representatives, and we can hold this regime accountable for the war crimes that they have committed. We can make a system that represents all people and not just the top 1%. This campaign is the direct continuation of the Bernie Sanders campaign in Indiana. So if you want a voice in Congress that will stand up to the oligarchs and stand up for working people, a grassroots vision, then join our campaign, join Progressive Victory, and please go to JacksonFranklinForCongress.com to support our campaign and spread the word. And if you live in Indiana, vote, 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 and spread the word.
Good luck. I can't believe it's so close. And likewise, I hope you're able to get some good Mexican after Cinco de Mayo.
No border there. Oh, I wish you the best.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Also,
and enjoy
for anybody
the,
who
Q&A.
wanted to volunteer at Track Ukraine, it's wetrackukraine@gmail.com. Send me an email and we'll sort through that. I keep seeing people asking how to help, so just email there. It'll be simple.
Yeah, there are ways to help outside of being a foreign legionnaire. All right, everyone take care.
Bye.
See you guys. Thank you.